Welcome everyone. My name is Brian Russell and I'm a program coordinator with the American Library Association's Public Programs Office. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's online learning session, which will present a comprehensive introduction to using discussion guides for community forums. This session is presented by programminglibrarian.org, a resource website of the ALA Public Programs Office, with support from the ALA Cultural Communities Fund. Today's session is part of an ongoing initiative of the Public Programs Office under the leadership of the ALA Public and Cultural Programs Advisory Committee to present professional development opportunities for libraries that support civic engagement initiatives. The ALA Center for Civic Life has been an important partner in this effort, and I can't commend Nancy Cronick and her committee enough for all of the work they've done to make this possible. Before we get started, I'd like to set out some basic information about communication in the online classroom. Then we'll move along to the main presentation. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please send a private message to our technical support, Angela Hanshaw, describing your problem. To send a private message, click on her name at the top of the chat box and select Start Private Chat. We will have a Q&A period after the main presentation. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box and we will collect them as we go and answer at the end. And finally, if you experience technical difficulties during the session, don't panic. The complete presentation is being recorded and will be available after the program ends. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Patty Deneen. She has been convening and moderating national issues forums in Pennsylvania and other states since 1994. She presently works as the contributing editor for the National Issues Forums news and website. So, without further delay, I'll hand the floor over to Patty.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for joining us for this webinar about issue guides for community discussions, National Issues Forums guides, and others. I work with the National Issues Forums, as Brian said, and so I'm most familiar with those guides, but they're not the only ones that are available, so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some other resources too. You might have noticed when you first came into the webinar room that we were asking that if you had a moment to let us know what motivated you to join this webinar or anything else that was on your mind. So thank you for those of you who posted your suggestions and your comments and experiences. You're welcome to continue to do that if you'd like. We are keeping track of what's being put in the chat box, and as we go along, as Brian said, we are going to have some time at the end for questions and answers, but if you think of a question, please do go ahead and put it down in the chat box, and we'll pay attention to that too. So we hope to spend about 45 minutes talking about some information we have about discussion guides, and I'm going to share some information with you, and then Carolyn Kaywood is going to take a section of the presentation today, followed by Nancy Cronick. So let's get started. Let's start with what National Issues Forums is very briefly and what National Issues Forums issue guides are. And the National Issues Forums was launched in about 1981 when some people got together with the idea that they were looking for a different way to help the public tackle important and complicated national public issues. They wanted to have a way to work on one of the questions that the Kettering Foundation, which National Issues Forums is still closely affiliated with, the research question that is, what does it take to make a democracy work as it should? So one of the lines they were pursuing was the idea that if you had the right kind of materials, the right kind of setting, the right kind of trained moderator, that you could help people tackle issues in a more productive and civil way. So they felt that this called for a different kind of discussion guide or material than was presently available. So they set out to start producing these kinds of guides. And in the picture you see there is, on the left is David Matthews, who is the president of the Kettering Foundation, and President Jimmy Carter, and this picture was taken at the first conference where national issues discussion guides were produced for the first time in February 1983. Since then, the National Issues Forums every year identifies several public issues, from usually 2 or 3 public issues to produce materials about. We call this issue framing, and it's done in a very particular kind of way where the issue is framed overall in a nonpartisan, non-agenda driven way. So the issue is described, the problem that's at issue, and then 3, occasionally 4 different approaches to the problem are presented for people to use to deliberate about. The picture you see there is typical. It's a small group, usually of people who get together for 2 or 3 hours in the evening or on a weekend to work their way through the issue discussion guide. The process is really flexible. So although it's most often a small group like this, it's also possible to alter the setting and the process so that you can accommodate a much larger group. Before we take a look at some of the particular issue guides and a little bit about what's available and cost and things like that, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions and see if you would respond to a poll that we have. Let me go back one and see. Here we go. Okay, so first, just a yes or no. Have you ever participated in a discussion program in your community in any way? And the other question, which of the following kinds of programs, if any, has your library held? So we're really interested. That's not an exhaustive list. Of course, there's other kinds of discussion programs, but those are some popular ones. If you want to name something else that you have used or participated in, feel free to type that into the chat box too. So I'll give you just a couple seconds to finish with your answers there, and thank you very much for participating. So, okay, thank you very much, and let's go on then to the next slide. So let's take a look. As I said, the National Issues Forums guides are the ones I'm most familiar with. We now have several different kinds. We have issue books. That's an example on the left there, News, Media, and Society. These are longer. These are the ones that are older as far as when we've produced these. They're usually at least 30 pages long. They're more detailed. They go into more depth. More recently, we've been producing issue guides, which are shorter. They're about 12 pages long. They present a summary and several options or approaches for people to deliberate about. And then occasionally, also more recently, we've had these issue advisories available, which are very brief summaries, just a few pages long, about the issue and the possible options. So if you're going to use materials, of course, one of the first things would be to decide what kind of material and how long an issue guide you want to use. So there's a number of things that might go into deciding that, and on our National Issues Forum's website homepage at nifi.org, this is just a screen capture of part of the homepage. You might want to first start by looking at the issue categories, which is right at the top here. I was trying to grab this pointer, but it's not moving for me. So let me try again. So there's different categories you see there, children and family and civil rights and so on. The ones I wanted to point out in particular include materials for teachers and materials in Spanish, which has been very interesting to some people. Not all the issue guides are translated into Spanish, but some of them have been. And then the category on the right there that you see, other national and local issue books, which is a place where I've been collecting issue guides and framings that have been done by individuals, local groups, and sometimes statewide projects. So these aren't the every year National Issues Forums issue guides, but a very interesting kind of diverse range of issue frameworks that people have created themselves, and then they've decided to freely share those with anyone who is interested. One of the things that happens when a guide is produced, 2 or 3 guides may be produced each year, and then usually one of them is selected by the Kettering Foundation to be followed closely, and information collected from forums around the country that are held using that issue guide, and then a national report is created from that. and often presented it in briefings in Washington, D.C. So that can sometimes be very attractive to people in your community if they want to be part of a national project and really be part of the public voice that comes out of that kind of a project. So that's something to keep in mind each year. Here's an example of one of those. Actually, this was a statewide project. The Oklahoma Partnership for Public Deliberation spent about a year framing and creating this issue guide about water management and growing demand for water, and they've made this freely available to anyone who'd like to use it, and you would find that in the category of other national and local issue guides. Here's a couple other examples. These are very recent, just this year, of more locally produced issue guides. On the left, called Bridging and Bonding, was produced by the Greater Federation of Women's Clubs, and it's about concerns about healthy communities in the time of disruption by technology and television and so on, concern about communities being able to stay healthy and connected in other ways. And on the right is called Looking for Answers Together, and this is about nurturing children and families, and this was a statewide project in Connecticut. The issue guide was produced by the Graustein Memorial Fund, and they've made that available for anyone who'd like to use it also. Aside from the issue books or guides or advisories themselves, there are often companion materials available. In particular, there are videos in the form of DVDs. Each book usually has a moderator's guide that's produced to go along with it that gives some tips and hints for moderators, questions specific to that issue that the moderator might use during the forum, and then an optional intended to be filled out anonymously post-forum questionnaire, and that's on the right there. You see those 2 pages. These are the kinds of materials, the questionnaire, that the Kettering Foundation will collect from forums that are focused on the issue that's been selected to be used as a national report. So it's completely up to the convener and moderator if they want to use those questionnaires, but they are available for use if anyone wants them. They're usually right in the book these days. So cost of materials is often a consideration when you're trying to decide what you want to use. Some of these are free downloads, usually in a PDF format. I think all of the materials in that category, I said other local and national issue guides, I think those are all freely available. Sometimes the one issue that's been selected to be used in a national project for making a national report are sometimes available for free for that year. Otherwise, the cost is usually ranging from $1.99 for a PDF download of the issue guide to $3.90 for those older, longer issue books. The DVDs cost $6 plus shipping. And then, as I said, some groups are making their own issue guides freely available to share with others too. And one other more recent possibility that you can consider if you'd really like to buy an issue guide and make it available to a group, say this is a group of high school kids in a school library, is that you can arrange to purchase a license so that you can buy and download one PDF copy, and then you can make up to 50 copies for it. You can also call and make arrangements if you need 100, 200, or so on. You can have it tailor-made to whatever you'd like. So some of the other places that produce and make available issue discussion materials. The American Library Association Center for Civic Life has been very active in producing issue guides, and especially the issue book about privacy concerns is a really good and current topic. The Choices program at Brown University does a terrific job of framing some international issues and providing a lot of background material. They're mainly produced for high school level, but they could really be used by anybody who's interested in the topics. Community Conversations, Everyday Democracy, NCDD website in their resources section. And this, as I said, this isn't an exhaustive list. There are more and more groups and individuals taking up the framing of issues all the time. So keep an eye out for an increasing list of these folks. So are libraries using these materials? And some of you have already said you are. I could see that. And how's it working out for them? So the person that's best able to talk about that, and the two presenters coming up, have a lot of experience with this. So next, Carolyn Kaywood is a member of the ALA Center for Civic Life Advisory Committee in Virginia Beach, and she has worked on framing issues, writing issue guides, and moderating forums. So I will now turn it over to Carolyn.
Hi, I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the experiences I've had with using National Issues Forum guides, mostly in the Virginia Beach Public Library in Virginia. Now, in Virginia Beach, typically the program is just viewed as adult programming. One of the most important aspects of it, I feel, is getting buy-in from administration. Some of the points I like to make are that this kind of program attracts the sort of people we want to be active in the library: potential users, information junkies, activists. Another aspect that I've found is that when citizens discover that other citizens disagree with them about a community concern, that takes some of the heat off of the elected officials, and they are grateful to us for that. This is not a role where Google is going to compete with us, which is always a good point, I think. And by using a pre-framed guide, there's a lot less work for the staff. Now, a couple of decades ago, the well-known polling expert Daniel Yankelovich found that on some issues he could get weird responses from the public. He decided that that meant that a public opinion hadn't coalesced at that point, and he looked for ways to help the public come to judgment, as he called it. As librarians, we tend to see informing citizens as pointing the old fire hose at them, and we've been kind of leery of doing any sifting or guiding that would make the information more digestible, for fear that it might be construed as not being neutral. But since an issue guide has no predetermined outcome, and each deliberation is unique, I don't think that it compromises our neutrality in the public's mind. Instead, it's a tool that helps the public come to terms with what the information means to become wiser about the topic. And then, having considered the question in depth, participants can become community catalysts. I've worked with a number of the National Issues Forum guides. The America's role in the... I'm having trouble with the arrow too. Come here, you rascal. America's role in the world. We were asked to test a draft version because Virginia Beach is a very military community, and those are the people who will be implementing that role, whatever it is. So we had a draft version, and then later we got to try out the final version, which was a very interesting experience. And observers came to our deliberation and included specific quotes from our citizens in the final report, which was really cool. We tried both the economic security and a nation in debt. Well, in economic security was okay, but boy, did a nation in debt hit the public nerve. We had to run it twice. There were so many people that wanted to participate. When we did the higher education one, nobody came. It does happen. But earlier we had done success in school and been very successful with it. We'd run 8 different sessions, but I think that's because we partnered with the schools, and our mistake was not to partner with someone in higher education for the other one. So think about partners. With Political Fix, That one I used just last month with the League of Women Voters, and they really liked it. Now the bullying one was one of those that I found through Patty's newsletter. It was actually created by the Dave Matthews Center in Alabama. And that's an example of the sort of publicity we've used. We find that calling it a conversation seems to be the best way to get people to understand that they are not coming to hear an expert. They are not going to sit in rows and simply be a sponge. That the whole thing depends on their participation. The other thing that I think is very important is to use personal invitation. Talk to the people you think might be interested. Get your staff to talk to the people that they know that might have an interest in the topic. If you've got a co-sponsor or a partner, then that extends your ability to invite people personally by all the folks that they know. That's a really important part of gathering a good participatory audience. Now, Patty mentioned the videos. If there's a video for the topic, by all means use it. It will just set things up and describe both the frame for the topic and the process of deliberation more succinctly than you can do it. And if you can provide resources to people in advance, that's great. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Talking about trade-offs is something that we don't do enough of when we talk about public issues. It's a very important part of the deliberation. Also, reflection, an actual moment of silence to think about the conversation before you go on, and talk a little bit about what each person learned from it. Not to rerun as often they try to do. Now, each deliberation typically is 20 or fewer people, though you, of course, you can add sessions for the extent you can get moderators. But I find that in evaluating a program of that size, you want to emphasize the impact of it, rather than sheer counting of numbers. So let's talk about results. Maybe you are participating in one of Kettering's reports by sending in the questionnaires and all. Or maybe you're doing a local report. We did a local framing on transportation, and no, this one was the one on redevelopment. We did two. And we did a report for city government. Or it might be a report to a partner organization. But also, part of the purpose of holding deliberative forums is to build civic capacity. And that capacity isn't used up just by being civil in the library. It should prompt participants to get involved with their government. In the subject of transportation, we had participants create an ongoing civic group that's running to this day. In fact, I was recording for them last night. In some cases, participants have sought appointment to boards and commissions. Other participants simply feel a little more articulate and capable of communicating with officials. And even if all that happens is that the deliberation spins off further conversations with more people, it helps the community coalesce around an action or a policy. It's very important to be upfront with participants about any planned use of the deliberations record or follow-up questionnaires, but I've never had anybody be really concerned. And it's equally important that the participants themselves understand that they have the responsibility to use the experience. You get wonderful feedback. We had one participant who said, "I grew up in a small town where citizen involvement was part of life. Community discussions like this are something we need to do more often." And another one said we should do it with a different topic every month. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Nancy Kranick, who's chair of the ALA Center for Civic Life Advisory Program, past president of ALA, and who teaches in the MLIS program at the School of Communication and Information in Rutgers University. Nancy?
Thanks, Carolyn, and thank you, Patty. It's a delight to be here with all of you today. I see a few of our members of our advisory committee are also with us, so welcome. Some of you probably have as much, if not more, experience with these books than we do. So Patty gave you a useful overview of the National Issues Forum's materials that are available to guide your discussions. And then Carolyn told you how the Virginia Beach Public Library has used these materials to work through difficult issues in their community, as well as build the capacity of the community to work together to find common ground and move forward. I'm going to talk just briefly today about how you can get started using these materials by building partnerships, by participating in various opportunities to learn more and share your experiences with other librarians involved with public deliberation, and by just jumping in and convening a forum at your library. And I know there's already been a question about moderating, so we can talk more about that at the end. So Carolyn mentioned the importance of partners, and I can't stress that enough. If you want to really get participation, find some partners. Now, the NIF materials themselves can help you identify partners for public deliberation. They explain the process so that you can point to the materials while you're making your pitch, and sometimes that's really useful. And of course, you'll probably be able to identify what we call the usual suspects to come to these forums without any problem. So say if it's a forum about the achievement gap, you want to involve the schools, parents, and teachers. But who else might you turn to help you convene these conversations? Well, let me give you an example of a forum we held when I lived in State College, Pennsylvania. It was on the topic of energy, and this was probably our most popular forum. We had 170 people show up. We found the usual suspects, people from utility companies, Penn State faculty who were involved with various forms of energy development, from liquefied coal and ethanol to sawgrass providers, to oil, gas providers, solar, and wind. But we also found the owner of the recumbent bicycle shop who peddled his way to meetings and the forums. Science teachers and their students, an ethicist, small business people, a borough council member, students, petroleum and natural gas engineers, a geographer, and an architect focused on sustainability all joined us. So how did the framing of the issue around energy help us to find all these great unusual suspects to participate in the forum? So let me give you a little sense of how these framings go. So there were three approaches on the energy forum. Approach one was focusing on unreliable sources, reduce our dependence on foreign energy. So with this, you could think about people concerned with this approach. So we look for people in the area involved with developing domestic energy sources, like those involved with natural gas. And in central Pennsylvania, that was definitely fracking was a big issue, coal production. But we also sought specialists in international relations and national security issues concerned with the impact of energy. And we had a person who had worked with the United Nations on energy issues. So approach two to that forum talked about getting out of the fossil fuel predicament. So here we look for people with interest in solar, wind, and nuclear power. And I might add, the nuclear person who came said he never would participate in something like this unless it was a safe environment, because people in the nuclear industry really felt that they'd be attacked. So he not only agreed, but he did join us and really contributed to the discussion. The third approach was called Curb Our Appetite, Reduce Our Demand for Energy. So here we identified people seeking to conserve energy, ranging from those who sell more efficient appliances and lighting devices, architects concerned with sustainability, green building technology people, of course, our biking enthusiasts, including our recumbent bike guy, hybrid car dealers and owners, and then, of course, teachers and their students who were involved with conservation projects. So you can see just from the way these materials are framed, you can start to identify the not just the usual, but the unusual suspects to join the conversation. And the more unusual you find, the more interesting the conversation will be. So you also want to find moderators and recorders. I know we've already had a question about this. Now, it's great if you and your colleagues are prepared to do this. I hope some of you at least have attended some of our other webinars or downloaded them where we actually taught you how to moderate, and you've had some chance to practice by now. But you may also decide that you want to find other people who might be skilled at this in your community. Now, believe it or not, there's probably a lot more people out there skilled in doing this than we might know. The National Coalition on Dialogue and Deliberation actually has a member map, and you can click it on and find out where if a member resides in your community. On the handouts, we have links for you, and one of the links is that member map. So you can click it on and get a sense of whether or not somebody you have somebody trained in your community to do this kind of moderation. And I suggest you get your colleagues involved as well. Don't go it alone. Get them to come to a forum, and once they experience, they'll have a better sense of what it's like and then how they might want to get involved. And I will tell you personally, I love moderating forums. I find the experience so rich, but a lot of people may not like it as much as I do, so try to find somebody who does. So how do you learn more then about how to do these kinds of forums? Well, within the American Library Association, we have several groups that are involved in these issues. One is just a membership initiative group that's called Libraries Foster Civic Engagement Membership Initiative Group, and we meet on Sunday mornings of ALA, and that is totally open, and it's a great place to hear about what's going on in other places and talk about what you're doing and share. We have an ALA Connect site that's connected to this membership initiative group. And the Center for Civic Life also has a blog where we have lots and lots of resources for you, bibliographies, links, articles, announcements about events, all kinds of materials. We also have a listserv. Some of you may have already subscribed because we use the listserv as well as our blog to promote this kind of programming. The National Issues Forum's newsletter is also a great source. That's the one that Patty edits, and I try to send it out to our Deliberate listserv when I get it, because it's just a terrific source of information. And Programming Librarian, put out by the Public Programming Office, and the co-sponsor with us of today's webinar. Programming Librarian picks up on a lot of great activities as well, some of which are sponsored by our Center for Civic Life, and some of which are sponsored by others as well. And then also, you may want to join the conversation at ALA Midwinter. So for the past 2 years, and this will be our third round, at Midwinter, we have actually held conversations with the library community. And they have been around a number of topics in a number of formats. I saw somebody talking about a World Cafe. We've done World Cafe. We've done appreciative inquiry. We've done all kinds of different kinds of dialogue and discussion. And these conversations, I think, are a terrific way to join your colleagues at our meetings and learn more about how conversation can really be a vital part of what you do in your library. So we hope you will get started soon. For those of you who participated in the previous webinars, maybe you already have gotten started. I know on the early poll that we did, several of you said you have participated. Hopefully you've actually sponsored them at your library. So it's a great time to start convening a forum at your library. The webinars that we held previously are all archived on the Programming Librarian website on our links page that is part of the downloads. You'll have a direct link to them. And as Patty mentioned at the very beginning, the American Library Association itself has framed some of these deliberative forums, and we did the one called "Who Do I Trust to Protect My Privacy?" Now, at my library at Rutgers University, we have used this forum each year during Banned Books Week to have a discussion about privacy. And this year we had a lot of students come. It's a very hot issue. We're very proud of this framing. Carolyn Kaywood, who's one of the presenters today, was key to helping us develop that framework. So we urge you to use it. It does not have a video, although you can probably turn on TV any night and get a sense of the problem. But we have a guide for participants, and we have a moderator's guide to walk you through how to do this forum. And I guarantee you from my own experience, it will be a really rich discussion. There's also a national conversation going on right now for the next 6 months. It's a national conversation on mental health. We are a participant in that national dialogue, we, the ALA Center for Civic Life. There are many locations around the country involved with this effort. Some of them are being led by mayors, other libraries. I saw an announcement just today from the Hartford Public Library that they're going to have host a forum on this topic in the next few weeks, and there's lots of materials. We have links for you again about the kinds of materials. You can do a very large kind of convening, and you can do a very small kind of convening. And this set of materials was put together by a coalition of groups, including the National Issues Forums and several other groups that were on the slide that Patty showed you early on, like Everyday Democracy, which works with the Hartford Public Library and does a lot of convening around the country. So we hope you'll tune into future webinars as well as check out our earlier webinars. So if you could use the chat box not only to ask us questions, but also type in any recommendations you have or ideas for future webinars about libraries and civic life. It really helps us to get feedback from people who are following us as to what it is you would like to hear about. We have talked about doing some webinars on how to frame issues, so you could actually take local issues like they did in Virginia Beach or like we did on privacy and frame them yourself. It's a little bit complicated. We're hoping that we can do that. And I see that Tim Bonneman, who is on the webinar today and is typing in something, Tim is expert on online dialogue, and maybe he can share with us some ideas during the chat time. So let me summarize then a little bit about what we have talked about today. So the National Issues Forums and similar materials offers us an inexpensive, accessible, easy tool to deploy to convene our communities in conversations about current difficult issues of common concern. David Matthews likes to call them wicked problems, and indeed, these are wicked problems that don't have easy answers. Now, the purpose of these materials and the framework they use is, for us, very important, and that is they're neutral and they're well-researched content. They are not advocating any particular view. They are just talking about the different ways to view the problem and lets the public take that position. Often they come with a video. They're ready to go. You can download them and they're available immediately. They're usually attractive. The ones that ALA did, not as attractive, but good enough, hopefully. And they're about these difficult issues that people are really concerned about in our communities. And they also identify what's at issue. Sometimes that's just how to ask the question. The way these issues are framed are around people's authentic experiences. They're not framed by experts in the field. They go out and they interview the public and they ask them about how they see the issue and they frame them accordingly. These are not frameworks that have simple answers, and there's no single answer. There's no approach in these frameworks that's mutually inclusive or exclusive. So you start to see the complexity of the problem and that people see a problem across many different views and approaches. So when we have these discussions, it is not a debate. There is nothing to win when we host a deliberative forum. It is a dialogue. And in my experience, it's a very rich dialogue that people really do engage in. And I will tell you from the research done by NIF and my own experience with these, a lot of people, after participating in one of these dialogues, actually changes their mind, which I think is a really important thing for us to remember, that people's minds can change. And they change partially because they listen to other people from their community. They listen deeply and they actually hear what people are saying. They're not just about talking and advocating. They're actually about listening and learning to empathize with where other people are coming from and learning why they feel the way they do. So as Carolyn told you, they give us a chance to weigh the pros, cons, costs, trade-offs, and consequences of a particular way to approach a problem. And finally, they allow us to focus on our own underlying values and beliefs and the tensions that we face because of that. So with that, I'm going to end my remarks and ask, I see there's a lot going on in the chat box. I'm going to try to catch up with all of you and see what it is you're asking about. I know that one of the earlier questions was, oh my goodness, going way back here, was a question about, well, who moderates these conversations? So I mentioned that we hope that you will learn, but there are other people. I don't know, Patty or Carolyn. Patty, jump. Patty.
Yes. So who moderates? There are a number of places around the country who for quite some years now have been regularly presenting moderator training workshops. Now there's a lot of variety. It's not very standardized. It runs from just a half-day training, sometimes even less than that, maybe an orientation, to as long as 2.5 days, and might include something about issue framing. But the one place on the National Issues Forum's website where I like to point people to is there's a navigation button at the top of the website called Network Contacts. And there we have a national map. And in each state, you can click on the state and it will give you some of the folks in those states who have experience with training moderators and convening forums. And even if they're not actively doing it right now, then you can contact them and they're more likely to know what's going on in that part of the country. And if they aren't planning something, they might be able to point you in the right direction. So maybe Carolyn has some more she'd like to say about that too.
I got my own training in several ways. One was, frankly, watching Nancy Chronic, which is something worth doing. Another was, you may have noticed on one of Patty's screenshots that there was a note to donate to the Taylor Willingham Fund. Well, when she was still alive, the city of Virginia Beach hired Taylor to come and train, I think, about 100 staff and 50 citizens. And I think that was a good investment in our community. I don't know if there's somebody like Taylor out there who would do that kind of training now, but it's something I would definitely recommend an entire community to think about, particularly if you had a topic you wanted to work on. We were working on redevelopment of land use, comprehensive planning issues at the time, and boy, were those some fraught issues. So it might be a matter of going bigger, going to your parent organization, whatever it is, and seeing if this is something you could persuade them to invest in.
Thanks, Carolyn. Patty mentioned the place on her website with the network contacts. Well, many of the groups around the country, like the Center for Civic Life at ALA, actually do training. They not only have moderators, but they will do training as well. So you might want to see if there's any in your area and see if they're actually already scheduling some of these training sessions. Some of them train you how to frame issues as well. But I think all of us over the years, particularly recent years, have found that it's very expensive for people to come to extensive trainings, and that's why the ALA Center for Civic Life and the Public Programs Office put on this series of webinars on how to do moderating and how to do convening. Now, speaking of which, one of the questions that has come up is, do we have any practical suggestions of what time of day and what day of the week is best to actually host these forums? So, Carolyn, you want to take a stab at that one?
What we found in Virginia Beach is Thursday evening. We don't get people on the weekends. Of course, we do have a beach. And people are often busy the first 3 nights of the week, but Thursday we get a little slack. I don't know if that would be useful for any other community, but it works for us.
In State College, they had a tradition of hosting these on Saturday, and when I moved to State College, they started them at 8:30 in the morning, and they had been doing them for 6 hours, and they reduced it to 3 hours. But our numbers were diminishing, and they had them on the edge of town, not anywhere near the university. So we decided that we would move them to the new public library, which is right downtown, right by the university. And we started having them at different times. We did evenings and we also did weekends. And that's when we got all those people showing up for the energy forum. So many that we had to borrow every empty chair in the library and use every room that we could with a lot of trained moderators to accommodate all the people that we had show up. Because usually you don't want more than, well, usually a good group is from 8 to 25 people. And I had the privacy forum I just did was up in the 30s. I've done forums with less than 8, but usually, around 15 is good. So you're not looking to necessarily be a blockbuster, although, certainly the energy forum we did was a blockbuster. We also tried something else. When we had them on the weekends, before we moved permanently to the public library, we offered the forum again and would do it on an evening of the week. And we actually alternated nights at first just to see how we did. And indeed, we got a different group of people. We had to figure out how to do it in such a way that you could work around people's dinner times, but you were done early enough so that the library didn't have to stay open and keep a security guard after 9. We also tried to condense them, so keep them to 2 hours or 2.5 at most, because it's difficult for people to commit more than that. In fact, we even had some that were a little shorter than that. So there's a whole lot of different ways you can test with this. But I think as much as anything, it really depends on your own community. Now, when I was in State College, one of our school teachers actually ran his class by doing forums, and they've really expanded that now in State College, where many of the teachers do this. So they actually did them in the classroom, and a lot of those students came to forums in the evenings on weekends too. So, it can be during the day in a class. At Rutgers, we had the forum on privacy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon during Banned Books Week. We used that week. We did it, I think it was on a Thursday. Thursdays are good because people are sort of winding down, but it really depends on your community. So let's see. We have some other questions here. So a couple of questions related to films or books that complement the themes of forums that people are going to offer. Carolyn, again, do you want to jump in there, and then I'll come back if Patty wants? Let me know, Patty. Put up your hand, and we'll have you also jump in here.
I want to recommend something that didn't come out of the Center for Civic Life, but they were webinars that Programming Librarians sponsored, and I hope Angie will straighten me out if I misname them, but I believe they were called Engage with an Explanation Point. There was a series of 3, and they talked about using art with teenagers. And the second one had a presenter from the Chicago Art Institute, and she used a painting by Jamie Wyeth called Kaluna in Frogtown. Don't get me to spell that. And that painting got everybody on the webinar talking about our biases and perceptions, and it really fed into welcoming. But it also gave me the idea. I knew we were coming up this fall on doing a locally framed discussion of sustainability and food politics, of using a photo of a grocery store with the imported fruits in the front and the mythical good old farmer with his tractor in the background, and seeing how people reacted to that piece of art. It didn't come off, but there's a thought, another way of using a visual to prompt discussion. Have fun. Be creative.
One of the things that our group did in State College before we were officially affiliated with the public library, and then we became part of the public library, was the public library did exhibits around our topic. We also got a full page from the newspaper in town before every forum to lay out the issues. So that was just another place where we could hear about it. The local cable station covered all of our forums. They actually taped them in hours worth. And they did a preview with us before each forum. So they would have us sit in the borough council chambers, the only time I've ever sat in the mayor's chair. And the different people who wrote about the different approaches to the forum would join us, and we would talk about each approach to the issue. And it would be like a 20-minute clip that would go on cable television. And believe it or not, people would, stop me and tell me they saw it. So people do watch this stuff. And so there's lots and lots of different ways that you can think of trying to link up. I see Patty wants to add, so I'm going to get off the mic and let Patty jump in here.
Well, thanks. I was just going to add that there are some folks right now who are experimenting with framing historical issues for deliberation. So, for example, I think someone's working on something about, pre-Revolutionary War, sort of, we're having a problem with England, what should we do? What are the choices? And then you can imagine how much resource material and research, if you were doing with high school kids or college group that is just kind of interesting, or the Civil War, or civil rights. So things that have already have happened, but you go back and imagine deliberating the possible different approaches. And of course, we have so much history now that you could read. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the Choices program at Brown University that I mentioned, that frames international issues, especially like recently, they very quickly framed the issue of what should we do about Syria. And they bring to bear a lot of different resources and bibliographies, and they just tons and tons of reading and maps and things that you can look at if you want to. So they're a possible source if you're looking for a list of books or things that are related to any particular issue.
Thanks, Patty. I see we've got a lot of people chiming in here about some of their own activities, which is very exciting. Kimberly's got something going on in Portland on December 4th on the topic of welcoming as a civic value, and wanted to know about films or books on that topic. And we can give you some ideas, although I don't know if any of us is as good at the film list as perhaps the book list here. But and several of you are talking about different ways to sort of supplement some of this work to bring more attention, which I think is terrific, as well as the webinar. So, and Carolyn says the past isn't dead; it isn't even past. One of a library that's very involved in this kind of civic engagement is, I'm trying to think of the name of it, right outside of Kansas City, and they in Kansas, and it's a county library system, and they are working in the region on framing a historic issue around the Missouri Compromise coming up on, we've got lots of big anniversaries this year, but some of the 150th anniversaries of several Civil War actions. So that is something that they're trying to do and looking at historically. I know there's a Franklin Pierce College in New Hampshire also does historic work, having been named by from the previous president. They try to look at that period. So I think there's some really exciting opportunities, and if we should do a webinar or a webinar series probably on framing, this is another approach that some of you might want to think about, is how could you frame one of these historic issues like Patty was talking about, where you could really try to take the issue from that time. And I think it'd be a great attempt to develop a real sense of civic literacy among youth. So speaking of which, civic literacy is one of the topics that the Center for Civic Life is very interested in, and a lot of the work we do with forums is just one way that you can really help develop a sense of civic literacy. I know in my own experience, and Carolyn and Patty might want to add to this, that people who participate in these forums really do get a chance to not only learn about an issue, but learn how to work in a civil way together to work through an issue. And that is, I think, part of what the civic literacy is. It's not just understanding information, or like Carolyn showed us when it comes out of the fire hydrant, just giving them information. It's also doing what we call public reasoning, working through it together. And so it's a really exciting way, I think, for all of us to think about this. So Carolyn, you want? Sorry, Carolyn, I meant to say, do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the work and what you did in Virginia Beach to really build that civic capacity and have people start to learn better how to work together?
Sure, this was a little more complex, but and it was about years ago now, I guess, that we started, we had to deal with the issue of redevelopment, and with a load of baggage of distrust. And so we approached that, and it was sort of a city government-wide effort. We approached it by inviting any member of the public that wanted to be involved. And we wound up with 100 hardcore citizens who helped us do the framing, which turned out to be really about trust, not land. Sometimes the question isn't what you think it is. Yeah, but the result of that has been, I know lots of people to call on for all kinds of purposes. And a lot of people feel a lot more empowered to deal with government. It was an amazing process. It was several years. It was a big investment of city staff time, mostly library, not entirely. There were people from the planning department and the PR people and so on, but the bulk were from the library, because we did the research and we created the website and we wrote most of the discussion guide, did a glossary, all that kind of thing. But it was labor well invested, and it got me started doing these NIF ones, which, you know, 2 people can do that.
Hey, do you want to add anything?
I didn't quite hear, but I'm assuming you were asking me, Nancy. But no, I think we're pretty much at the end of our time, maybe a little bit over. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for your attention, and please feel free to let us know what kind of webinars you might be interested in the future. We'd love to do what you're most interested in. So thanks very much, and good luck with your work, everybody. And I'll just let Nancy say goodbye.
Actually, I'm going to thank you as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Brian. So, Brian, this is your last word.
All right, thank you to all the speakers for this fantastic introduction to the ins and outs of the deliberative forums. ALA staff will be sending everyone a brief survey about today's session, which you should receive by tomorrow morning. And when you get that email, please take a few minutes to share your feedback with us. And thanks once again to Patty Deneen, Carolyn K. Wood, Nancy Cronick, and the ALA Center for Civic Life. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.